Hey guys, before we jump in today's episode, we have some exciting news. We recently partnered with TruePro. They're a great place to buy strings, grips, and tennis apparel. Use discount code Painting Lines, that's one word, for 20% off store wide. You can find the link in our bio.
Ready?
Welcome back to Painting Lines. Last week we talked about the wild indoor season, recapping Vienna and Basel. This week we'll be breaking down the Paris Masters, which is the last Masters 1000 tournament of the season. Now, this tournament is pretty notorious for people coming out of nowhere and winning. We had Berdych in '05, Albanian in '07, Jack Sock in 2017, Hachinov 2018, and most recently Runa in 2022. So, Aidan, I have a question for you. You had texted me last Thursday saying Alcaraz out, and I responded, I think Zverev wins it. I mean, after all, he was the highest seed. So, my question is, did you feel the same way, or did you think that an underdog might take this one?
Yeah, I mean, like you just said, he was the highest seed left. So to an extent, I was like, you got to think he's the favorite to win it, especially because he's been consistently very solid this year. But I didn't really want him to win. I mean, we saw Dimitrov in there. I was hoping he might get some redemption after losing in the final last year, or Deminar, who obviously is pushing to make that last spot for Turin. Actually, both of them are, but both of them were still in at that point. I was hoping for one of them to take it. But I think, like you said, Zverev probably was the favorite because he was the highest seed left.
Yeah, I just think this is pretty funny or ironic because last week the theme of the episode was like, oh, up and coming talent. And Zverev just kind of pumped the brakes on that one. This is kind of a statement victory, Masters 1000 for him. And, this is a pure example of taking advantage of an open draw, right? Like not having to play Alcaraz or Sinner, and he capitalized.
Yeah. I mean, obviously having those guys out of the draw for him was pretty nice.
Yeah, yeah. So let's just jump right into it. Well, first of all, before the tournament even started, Sinner had to pull out due to a virus. I don't think it was anything serious because he came out and said that this would be like a 2 to 3 day recovery, but he just didn't feel ready to play. Totally understandable. And then jumping into the actual tournament, we touched on this last week, but Tommy Paul lost to Manarino in real time, like as we were recording. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, just touching on the center thing before we jump into the Tommy Paul match, I do think it is a little interesting because we're seeing with Alcaraz and Sinner that they're very much like cautious with when they play. I feel like in the past, guys probably tried to push through a little bit more, but maybe with the amount of injuries we see from Sinner and Alcaraz, they're being a lot more cautious with their bodies so that they don't have like a kind of a burnout really early on in their career. Moving on to the Tommy Paul thing, losing to Manarino, I think it is weird, like you said, just because Manarino obviously hasn't had the greatest year, and Tommy Paul loses twice in the first round after winning in Stockholm. So I don't know whether that's just a slump where he had this massive high and then comes out and loses these two first round matches to guys that really you wouldn't expect him to lose to. But it's just a tough thing because maybe he realized like he's not going to make it to Turin, and that took the wind out of his sails a little bit.
Yeah, it makes you think if something could possibly be going on behind the scenes, like whether it's a nagging injury or something of that nature. Whereas like Sinner and Alcaraz, or Sinner in this example, he doesn't need to play this Masters 1000. Like he's already locked in to turn. He's got his number one seed. Whereas Tommy Paul maybe is pushed to keep playing these tournaments, even though he may not be 100% healthy. And he doesn't want to announce anything because it may come off as weak. I don't know. This is pure speculation, but yeah, I don't know. I think you're kind of right about the Alcaraz and Sinner thing about them not having to play every tournament because they can't. Like, not every player can afford to do that because they're not highly as ranked or not having as good of a season. I think it's your circumstance.
Yeah, I mean, I'll talk about this a little bit later, but Zverev is it's kind of funny because obviously had an injury, major injury a couple of years ago, but this year he's been like one of the most active players on the tour. Like
Mm-hmm.
has played significantly more tournaments than both Alcaraz and Sinner. But with Tommy Paul, also, I think just at the end of the year, it's really weird Like these guys are just like, oh, I have maybe one tournament left. I'll just play that tournament and then I'll be done for the year. And when you're in that sort of mindset, it can be easy to maybe just kind of throw in just a match and not be as worried about losing. But I don't want to put that on Tommy Paul either because obviously it's speculation.
Yeah, totally. All right, let's move on to another player who we have rarely mentioned on this podcast recently, and that's Bublik. He got his first top 100 win in this tournament since Wimbledon.
Yeah. Honestly, I mean, Bublik has had kind of a terrible year since like March. Like obviously the very beginning of the year he had some decent results. I think he even got a title if I remember correctly. But since then he's been playing pretty poorly, a lot of early exits and like you said first top 100 win since Wimbledon. Not great for a guy that early in the year I think he hit his peak ranking in the top 20.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure. So UTS, how they do player interviews on their social media. He was on there and he was talking about how much harder it is for him to play lower ranked players. Like he feels that pressure. Like that's a guy where he'd rather play someone better than someone worse because he feels like he has more to lose. And that's just kind of an unfortunate situation where you get the yips and you're a much more talented player, but you just can't really like play as loose as you want.
Yeah, and I think that's a tough thing for all tennis players just in general. Like if you play someone that you feel like is worse than you, I feel this myself. Obviously, this is a completely different scenario where I'm a just an amateur low level player. But if you play someone worse than you feel like, oh, I have to win, and maybe that prevents you from going for shots that you would normally go for. Whereas if you're playing someone better than you, you're like, I'm going to lose anyway. I might as well go for these shots.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to see that people feel that even at the highest level here, where Bublik's like, if I'm playing Alcaraz, I feel no pressure to win the match, so I can play very loose. Whereas if he's playing someone worse than him, he might feel more pressure to not miss.
Yeah, and it's surprising because I feel like a guy like that, you kind of see him have fun playing tennis. Like he's always joking around, he's always laughing. So you would think that he just approaches every match the same, but clearly not.
Yeah.
That pretty much sums up the round of 64. Now, jumping into the round of 32, I want to touch on some upsets. So, first, Rude losing to Thompson. This is one of those paper upsets, but in reality, probably not an upset, right?
Yeah, I mean, look just for example at the U.S. Open. I mean, obviously Rude did pretty well at the U.S. Open, but so did Thompson, and that was maybe Rude's only good hardcore performance of the year was at that U.S. Open. And Thompson, I feel like, has been relatively consistent throughout the year, not at the same level really as Rude, where he had that peak playing great on clay earlier in the year. But like you said, it's kind of a paper upset. This is more of a toss-up match, I feel like, in general. And we also know how much Rude hates playing on indoor hard courts.
Oh, yeah. And then how about this next one, though? Would you consider Rublev losing to Sarundalo a paper upset?
No, I feel like this is more of a legitimate upset just because Rublev, we know, has the ability to play at a very, very high level on these indoor hard courts. Not that Rude doesn't, but I feel like Rublev, we've seen him be threats to win titles on hard courts throughout this year. And Cerundolo is more of a clay court player. Not to say that he's bad on hard courts, but we generally expect more out of him on a clay court. And so I think seeing him get the victory here is a much bigger upset than Rude losing to Thompson.
I totally agree with you because even though Rublev has been struggling lately, I was very shocked that he lost to Sarundalo, especially on an indoor hard.
Yeah.
Um, and this next one I want to touch on Tiafo and Mteshi, whatever,
Mpeshi. I actually,
Mpeshi. There's a T in there, but I think it might be silent.
you know what's actually funny is the M is also silent too. I looked up the
Oh,
sound recording name on the ATP Tour website, and
let's
it's
hear it.
Pesci Pericard, I think.
No, say it
But
in your French accent. Come on.
Pesci Pericard. No, I don't think that's how
Perfect.
it's. I think it does have a regular R in there, but
All right.
uh,
Well,
yeah,
yeah. Either way,
yeah.
losing to Tiafo, you hit your bet.
Exactly. I mean, we obviously this isn't that unexpected because I did bet on Pericard winning, but it was a very close match. Still, I think a little bit of a disappointment for Tiafo, just where he's hoping for those big results because we've seen him have a few big results this year, and he's hoping to just have those a little bit more consistently, and he just hasn't been able to.
No. And this next one, I was the most shocked by because of the scoreline. We have Hurkacz losing to Mickelson 6-1, 6-3. And I'm shocked because Hurkacz doesn't normally get broken like that. Like he's a hard guy to break.
Yeah.
And I don't think Mickelson's return game is that great either. Like he's not a very mobile guy.
I mean, yeah, I think it's just a situation where Hurkacz maybe is just a little low on confidence right now. Obviously, last year he was kind of at a high at the end of the year and was an alternate for Turin, and then this year has an injury, just hasn't really been playing at the same level, and then comes out against Mickelson. Maybe he is a little bit injured, uh, and has a really disappointing result here for him. But a great win for Mickelson. Obviously, Hurkacz is a big opponent to beat.
Yeah, he is. And this next matchup was just a great round 32 matchup. Draper and Fritz.
Yeah, Fritz showcasing the new blonde hair too.
Yeah. What do you think?
About the
Rocks
blonde
it or
hair,
no? Yeah.
I mean, I'm cool with whatever. I mean, I've gone for that look before. It's
I was
it's
gonna say that's right up your alley, man.
it's a fun one if he likes it. I think it's always interesting to change up your look.
I agree. I think it is a fun one. And he's even said he's like, whatever. I've wanted to go blonde. If it doesn't look good, I'll just shave it off.
Yeah, I'll shave it off or wait for it to grow out. Like it's only a short period while it's there. So anyway, I on this matchup, I do think it's an interesting one because this actually could have been a U.S. Open final matchup because obviously we had both of these guys in the semis and Draper lost to Sinner, but still two guys that played very well earlier in this year. And I look at this match and I wonder if they had been in the U.S. Open final, do you think Draper would have beaten Fritz?
Yeah, really. I think for Draper to have been in that US Open final, I think he needed to not have thrown up 5 times in the match
Yeah.
against Sinner, be in better shape. And then Sinner, remember when he took that fall and hurt his wrist? And then I think like struggled for a couple points after. Like if the stars aligned, Draper could have been playing Fritz for a US Open final and it would have been more of a toss-up versus like, all right, Sinner Fritz, we kind of know where this one's gonna go.
Yeah, no. So, for example, if Sinner's injury, let's say this, his wrist had been more hurt, he had to withdraw from that match. And Draper, we know his conditioning maybe wasn't that great given the fact that he threw up multiple times in the match. But if that had been the matchup, do you think Draper would have won it, or do you think that conditioning would have come more into it? Where obviously this is a 3-set match, whereas that would have been a 5-setter.
That's that's an interesting question because the final was actually played during the day when it was hot, and this semifinal match was also during the day too. So if you would have said, or sorry, if the final would have been at night, I would have been less concerned about Draper's fitness. But I think since it was during the day, I would put a premium on his fitness heavily there, and I would take Fritz just because of the conditioning.
Yeah, I think also if that match started to wear on longer, obviously you're playing an American in the U.S. Open final, so that probably would have been
Oh
all for
yeah,
Fritz. So definitely would have been an interesting one to see. But obviously here Draper takes him down.
yeah. This next match I want to talk about, Popper and Medvedev, was a fantastic one. Hint, hint, might have been the match of the week. We'll see. You gotta
Maybe.
stay tuned. But I think the biggest thing that happened in this match was just an awful line call in the third set where Popperin was saving break point. He had a nice lob and the ball clipped the line and it was immediately called out by the line judge. And Popperin's like complaining to the ref, like, what are you doing? What are you doing? So the ref's like, hey, I'm sorry. I admit it was a terrible call, but I can't do anything about it. Like we have to replay the point now. And it was a point that he was going to win, but he hung on. So it shows his mental fortitude for a relatively young guy. And with pretty good Masters 1000 record so far.
Yeah, I mean, obviously had a massive result in Canada earlier this year. This is probably his third highlight of the year, right? I mean, winning Canada, beating Djokovic at the U.S. Open,
Mm-hmm.
and now taking down Medvedev. This is obviously a great year for him, really showcasing his top level performance. On the other side, though, we had Medvedev, who was a little bit unhappy. I know he was talking about how the balls in these tournaments are just not really fair in his mind. He says, oh, you open up a can of 6 ball or 2 cans with 6 balls, and every single one's going to be different when you hit it, which
Whoa.
is something that he's not happy with. He wants it to be very consistent, and he thinks that having this inconsistency with the balls kind of is a factor that he shouldn't have to deal with, especially at this high of a level.
Yeah, I think it really depends on how people play. Like maybe if you have more sensitivity and more feel, it impacts you more. Cause I've heard both sides. I've heard players come out and say, all right, come on, like stop bitching about the ball. It's really not that big of a deal. But then I've also heard players like Medvedev who, take it very seriously. So I don't know because I'm not at that level how much of a difference it can make. And it also, if you're losing, you're probably likely to be more frustrated too and just complain.
100%.
And
100%.
was he talking about the variability of the balls in this tournament? Like you open 2 cans in this tournament and they're all different, or just throughout the tour you play with different balls?
I think both he's unhappy with, but I think this
Wow.
time he was talking about this tournament specifically. But he has voiced this in the past, so it's not specific just to this tournament.
Yeah. Well, that's why I love him because he's so outspoken. He's not afraid to just, say what's on his mind.
Exactly. Exactly.
And then this next point I want to touch on, not that big of a deal, but just something I noticed was these French players were having a pretty good tournament. I mean, we saw 5 of them into the round of 16, guys like Humbert, Manarino, Fils, Rinderknecht, and Cazot. I feel like the Manarino, Rinderknecht, and Cazot were surprises, but I expected Fils and Humbert.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly would have expected Impeshi Pericard to be in that group too, but he didn't make it quite as far this tournament.
Yeah. All right. Now we get into the round of 16 where it starts getting interesting here because first match, Zverev feels rematch from the Hamburg final earlier where Fils had beat him at his home tournament. And now we have Zverev avenging it with a victory in Fis's home tournament. Well, actually, I think Fils is from Metz, so not quite his home tournament, but home country tournament.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just cool to see him get the revenge here, but it's not as surprising given how we know Zverev was playing in this tournament.
Yeah, and I think their Hamburg final match could have potentially sparked a little rivalry because that was tense. Remember, Feast had the underarm serve that was just absolutely booed by the crowd, and then Zverev, he had said something like, "Oh, real classy," and then the handshake at the net was just super brief, super tight, and now they're going to play each other again here. Zverev won this one, Feast won the last one, so I think we could see some new beef coming on, especially with like the older player in Zverev and the new up and coming talent in Thies. I just think these moments are great for the sport.
Yeah. It is funny when you think about it. Like, what other sport is it where like they go and handshake the other person every single time, no matter what? Like, it's a requirement of the match. The match isn't over until they do the handshake at the net, it feels like.
Yeah, I know. And then, like even in, American professional sports, it's just kind of on your own accord. Like if you lose the game in football, you can just walk straight into the locker room. You
Yeah.
don't have to.
Well, no, no.
It's not
It's
like little league.
honestly, it is kind of similar. Like you're right. They do go kind of shake hands, and if they don't, it's a big deal.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And but it's different players get different heat for it, right? Like if you see Tom Brady not shake someone's hand after a loss and run to the locker room, I feel like he kind of gets praised for it. It's like, oh, he's a competitor. Like he's pissed he lost. But then if you have someone else do, it's like, oh, he's a bad sport. He doesn't
Yeah.
appreciate the
I think it
competition.
depends. I think it depends on whether you're a Tom Brady fan or not, to be honest.
Yeah, I just gotta respect the GOAT.
Yeah.
Yeah. Next match, super interesting. Humbert taking out the number one seed Alcaraz. Overall, I thought this was a pretty balanced match because the players had very similar stat lines. I was looking through it. I think ultimately it just came down to Humbert being able to get that late break in the third and then finish it off 7-5. Now, as I was saying, I was looking into the stat lines and they had the same exact amount of airs, which was 38. But Humbert had 3 more winners. He had 26, whereas Alcaraz only had 23. And the point percentage, Humbert came out just barely on top. He won 52% of the points to Alcaraz's 48. So all in all, tight match. And I think great for Humbert. You saw the celebration after.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of funny because I was looking at something the other day and it was talking about how different sports kind of value different things. Like it was talking about how basketball, the value of the sport is the ability to be consistent for a long period of time, whereas something like sumo wrestling is about just who can get the upper hand really quickly. And it's funny how in tennis it seems like the value is really about who can perform the best in the critical moments. You look at someone winning 52% of the points, and it's like, okay, this match really could have gone either way, but who won the important points at the right times?
Yeah, and I feel like you can also use that analogy throughout the tennis season too, because it's so damn long, right?
It's also interesting because there's a lot of different courts these people play on, and Medvedev and Alcaraz uh, had kind of complaints about the court speed here as well. And one thing I was kind of wondering about that is obviously when Alcaraz says something, it's a little bit more covered by the media versus if some guy that was maybe outside the top 30 or 40 said it. And I'm wondering, like, do you think that we take Medvedev and Alcaraz's opinion with more weight just because he is like a top player? Obviously, like he gets more wins, so when he loses, it's a bigger deal. And he says, "Oh, the court speed here is ridiculous." Do we take that into account more than if someone that's outside the top 20 said it? I feel like we have to, right?
Yes, 100% yes. Like I feel like you kind of have to earn your platform to speak. Like I'm way more likely to listen to what Alcaraz has to say than, someone who's ranked 250th in the world. Like I said, you kind of have to earn how much you can really complain, I guess.
Yeah. My question about that though is this, like, do you then say, hey, we're going to slow down the courts for these guys, or is it better to have fast courts where you're going to get more variance in the results?
Oh, so Medvedev was complaining about the court being too fast, or
I
just
think he
Alcaraz?
generally does. Like he talked about that back in Indian Wells too. Like,
Well, he complained that the court was too slow in Indian Wells because
oh, my mistake.
he prefers the fast court. So I kind of like. I don't think the courts should be changed. I think generally they have been getting slower though because they're trying to make tennis more entertaining and extend points. So I don't know. I kind of like the whole like fast court switch up too.
Yeah, definitely makes it more variance in the results, like I was saying.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. All right, let's hop into the quarters. So we have Zverev taking care of business against Tsitsipas. I tuned into this match because, like I mentioned before, I love whenever these two play each other, and this was a pretty tight match up until Tsitsipas double faulted on break point at 5-all, and then Zverev went on to take that set in the first, and then he got an early break in the second and was pretty much in cruise control for the rest of the match.
Yeah, I mean, it just tennis is such a mental game. So that break point when you're so tight in a match like this, and then you double fault, so easy to get in your head, and probably just lost control of the match from there on.
Yeah, yeah. And I thought Stefanos was doing a great job of bringing Zverev in and then ripping passing shots. Like his backhand was genuinely on in that first set. Like I thought he was playing great. I just thought when they would get into the longer rallies, he couldn't really sustain. Like he was the one that was more likely to make an error, whereas Zverev was just automatic. And I feel
Yeah.
like Zverev's passive playing style works really well against Stefanos because Stefanos has been very aggressive lately. Like he's been coming to the net, I feel like more than he did in previous years.
Yeah, the setup for the passing shot is always, I feel like, a very risky strategy. Like you only really do that when you feel like it's your last option. Because obviously, if you're giving someone the chance to come to the net, you're probably giving them an approach shot, which is a chance for them to put the point away. But if you can do it effectively, you can get them to the net and have a good chance to pass them. So it's a risky strategy until it stops working, and then it's just a terrible strategy.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, you definitely got to use it against someone who doesn't have good hands either.
Yeah.
Like I'm just one of my like 3-5 matches. I'm playing this guy who like I kind of could tell in warmups he couldn't really volley. I'm like, all right, so this is what the strategy is gonna be. Bring him
Yeah.
in and not even try to pass him, just rip him right at him.
Yeah,
You can't
little
volley
different
it.
with the guys that are
Right,
professionals, but yeah,
right.
it's that idea. It's like if you can take any advantage, that's what you're going to go for.
Yeah. All right, let's move on to this heartbreaker for you. Runa holding on against Deminar. Were you pretty upset?
Yeah, I mean, just bummed out, especially because Deminar is right on the edge of making it to Turin. So would have been nice for him to get those extra points, but it looked like Deminar might get it there for a second.
I was gonna say, I think Deminar is he's one of those players that I'm very confident, even if he loses the first set. Like he did this earlier in the tournament against Draper, he dropped the first set. He did it last week in Vienna against Mensik, where he dropped the first set. And he's just kind of a comeback player. He's someone like a Djokovic where he'll lose the first set, but he did that and he's going to figure out your playing style and then he's going to come back and he's going to try to wear you down. And kudos to Runa because Runa is like the quintessential player of getting worn down. Like I feel like especially in these type of matches where he wins the first set and then he loses the second set, he usually tends to kind of like break down and lose focus. But he came back, held on, and actually beat Deminar here in
Yeah.
a tight three setter.
I think it's one of those things where Deminar just really depends on his ability to be physically better than the other person. Not like I'm going to have a better forehand or backhand than you. I'm just going to be physically in better shape than you. And as this match wears on and you get more tired, I'm only going to get stronger.
Totally, totally. And it kind of makes you wonder, is he 100% healthy now? Like, because remember he had that hip issue.
Yeah. I mean, he did take some time off, so you'd think he's relatively healthy. 100%. It's hard to say that any of these guys are 100% at this point in the season,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, it's
But I think
grinding.
he's probably not super unhealthy.
Yeah. Then the other two matches, Hachinov just continuing to play well, keeping his level high, pretty handedly victory over Dimitrov. Really,
Definitely a bummer there.
yeah, kind of a bummer. That was the guy you wanted to see win the tournament. Not great when you're like hyped for the match, the quarterfinal match, and then it just goes the way it does.
Yeah, I mean, I remember I wasn't even watching this match early on, and then I turned it on. It was already like 4-0 for Hachinov. I was like, oh well, this is not a good sign.
Yeah, that was funny when you texted me like, "Yeah, let's go." And I'm like, "Oh yeah, I got to tune into that." And I saw it was like match point. I'm like,
Yeah,
"Fuck."
exactly.
And I was an idiot too because I think I texted like, "Yeah, let's go Dimitrov" before actually checking. And then I'm like,
Yeah,
"Well, should have
not
checked
going
the
great.
score before saying that." But yeah, and then Humbert just taking care of business against Thompson in the quarters. I
Yeah.
think I think you got to give Thompson a lot of credit here for making his first Masters 1000 quarterfinal run.
Yeah. Interesting thing about Thompson, I wonder if he is right now the guy in the world that's the best singles and doubles player.
Ooh, that'd be an interesting stat. Why is he pretty up there in
Well, because I
doubles
mean, think
too?
about I think he won the US Open, right? In doubles this year.
Oh yeah,
So obviously that's massive for him. And the fact that he's making Masters 1000 quarterfinals in singles
yeah,
and making a later run in the US Open in singles obviously is big for his ranking there.
yeah. I just don't even know what to think about Thompson. Like he's got that the talent and the ability, but he's not one of like the players you expect, if that makes sense. Like he's one of those players, I forget what you call them, but they're just kind of like an Humbert, like, oh, he's in the quarterfinal, or oh, he lost first round.
Yeah, I don't remember if I had a name for them, but obviously it's the guys that you almost forget about during the season. You're like, okay, this guy, I don't know whether he's going to lose in the first round or be in the semis.
All right, now the semifinals. Humbert hanging on against Hachinov. Hachinov, as I alluded to earlier, had won this tournament in 2018 against Djokovic, which, when a player gets to the semis, you kind of think like, oh, maybe this is his tournament. Maybe he can do it again. But Humbert just kind of crushes that dream of a repeat.
Yeah, but I mean, like we talked about last week, these are two guys that have been very solid over the past year on indoor tournaments, and both of them making the semis here kind of backs that up.
Yeah. What is Hachinov's ranking? Do you know? Is
He's
he
ranking overall somewhere in the teens.
okay? Yeah, because I thought maybe he could have made a sprint to Turin here in the last couple weeks.
I think he's
Or was
about
it
as
too
close as
late?
Zumbera is, which is not super close, but somewhere I think they're like 15 to 18, somewhere in that range.
Yeah, yeah. Well, the other match, Zverev ended Runa's run, which Runa was another guy who won this tournament in 2022. And some people say it was one of the craziest runs in tennis history. I mean, the guy beat five top 10 players.
Yeah. I mean, that's nuts. It is interesting to see that after the semis we had a guarantee of a new winner, which was
Yeah.
kind of cool. I mean, it always nice to see someone win the tournament that hasn't won it before.
Yeah, and having a French guy in there too.
Yeah, but I mean, you talked about Runa in 2022. That was obviously, like you said, one of the craziest runs of all time, especially because it came during like Runa's breakout year where he started that year just inside the top 100. He debuted in the top 100 in January of that year. And then by the year's end, he was in the top 10. So pretty nuts. But honestly, since then, he hasn't played at the same level. Like, I feel like that was the peak of when everyone was like, okay, he's going to be up there with like Sinner and Alcaraz. And since then, he has one ATP title, which was a 215 Munich, and just hasn't really been at quite the same level.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. He was 19 at the time, and people were kind of toting him as like the next prodigy, but he's had some coaching difficulties. I think it could be attributed to maybe some off-court stuff. Maybe this was just such an amazing year that he's regressing to his mean. Like, after a long time, you can't just have a year like that every year unless you're, one of the big three or Sinner Alcaraz.
Yeah. I mean, we talked about the same thing with like FAA. Same year, he peaked in the top 10, actually made like the year end finals. So pretty crazy, but
Yeah.
it's just how it goes. Sometimes you have your peak and then you regress a little bit.
Yeah, hopefully it's just a little bit. I would hate to see Runa regress all the way to where FAA is at now.
Yeah. I mean, FAA, I mean, I don't know if I talked about this last week, but really has to perform pretty well at the beginning of next year, or he's going to fall down into like the 40s because he's kind of being carried like half of his ranking points, I think. Not half, but a little less than half is from that one tournament in Madrid where he made the final. So gotta back that up with some other performances here.
Yeah, under pressure. Dum, 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 dum. Anyway, all right, let's get into the finals. Zverev dominated Umber 6-2, 6-2, and won his seventh Masters 1000 title. And this had me thinking, like, dude, Zverev is kind of underrated or overlooked because he doesn't have a Grand Slam, but he has a very astonishing career, accolade wise.
Yeah. I mean, seven Masters 1000 titles. That's more than a lot of really good players. And it's interesting, actually. He has won a lot of different ones. I think he's won five different ones out of his seven Masters 1000 titles, which is something that not a lot of people can say. I feel like a lot of guys, if they win a couple Masters 1000, is probably the same one or at least similar surface. He's now won on both clay and hard. So very cool. I mean, this wasn't his first hard court one, but you know what I
First
mean.
Paris, yeah, first
Yeah,
Paris
first
one.
time in Paris. So
Yeah.
very cool to see that. And yeah, he actually has more Masters 1000 than Medvedev now. Just broke the tie with him.
Wow. Wow. I mean, just overall, his serve was on and he was holding games to love or to 15. Humbert never really came close to a break point. And this reminded me of the other Masters he won this year back in Rome against Jerry. He just kind of dominated on serve. And then when he was on his return game, played pretty well, just percentage tennis, kind of boring, didn't really do a whole lot, but was able to get the key breaks. And you know, Jerry never really stood a chance when Zverev was on serve. So um, just all around great, great play. And I'm curious to see if Zverev can just kind of like parlay this into, maybe a win in Turin.
Yeah. I mean, obviously Zverev has won in Turin as well in the past, or at least he's won the ATP finals in the past. But it is interesting to look at these two runs where he won Masters 1000 this year, where he kind of avoided playing some of the highest level of talent. Like
Yeah,
you look,
yeah,
he played Jari in that one, in that crazy tournament where Tabilo had that massive run. And then this time he's playing against Humbert, who obviously is a great indoor player. We've talked about that, but still isn't an Alcaraz or Sinner or even a Medvedev, where these are the guys you would have expected to be there. And it kind of goes back to what we were talking about last week with the depth of talent, where Zverev just has to play a little bit consistent and he can make these deep runs. Whereas we've seen a lot more inconsistency from the other top guys, it seems like.
yeah, totally. I don't know if you caught his speech, but it was so funny. He started it off with, first off, sorry to all the fans, and with his little like Zverev smirk. He's great, dude. He's such a character.
Yeah.
Bear, on the other hand, he looked kind of nervy out there, which I don't blame him. I'm pretty sure this was his first Masters 1000 final, and he's playing in his home country. And, you know, Zverev's been there. It's kind of one of those things where you said like the more you've been there, the less pressure, the easier you feel. I feel like the nerves definitely got to Humbert because he was making unforced errors, he was double faulting, and it just didn't look great for him out there. But I will say, I will give him credit throughout the whole match, no matter how bad he was losing or what the score was, he looked motivated. Like he was constantly, you know, getting into himself. He was looking at his box. He showed optimism throughout. Like whenever he would hit a nice shot and it would get him to, I don't know, 15-40. Like he just looked like he could still win this game. Like I never really counted him out, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think that that kind of goes into, yeah, like you said, the nerves, where he probably went into this match and was saying to himself, "Hey, don't underperform. Essentially, don't play like, oh, I want to keep the ball in and hope that my opponent misses shots," because he knows how good Zverev is at playing consistent tennis. So he probably went into this match and was like, "Hey, go for your shots. Don't be worried about missing." And sometimes that can lead to too many errors, like you were talking about. But to an extent, it's like, would you rather play that way where you were at least going for it, or maybe have a slightly closer match that isn't actually as close because you're not being as aggressive on the court?
Totally, totally. I mean, overall, I think he leaves with his head held high. This was a great tournament for him. And in my opinion, he was essentially playing on borrowed time after that win against Alcaraz. Like he had no business beating Alcaraz. So any win after that is just icing on the cake.
Yeah, I mean,
He was playing with the house's money.
yeah, it's arguable though. I mean, is Alcaraz as good on hard courts, or at least indoor hard courts, as someone like Humbert that plays that uber aggressive style? Obviously, Alcaraz does play aggressive a lot of the time, but you look at Humbert, when Humbert's on, he's clearly a top level player.
Yeah. Yeah, he is.
But yeah, I mean, speaking on Zverev as well, after this tournament, he actually moves above Alcaraz in the rankings, which is genuinely pretty crazy when you consider the fact that Alcaraz has won 2 Grand Slams this year, which I think is like 4,000 ranking points on its own. But kind of when you look at their records for the year, I think it's just because Zverev has just been far more active. Like I kind of mentioned this earlier, but Zverev played 22 tournaments this year, whereas Alcaraz played only 15. So 7 more tournaments, which is a lot. And so you got to kind of weigh that in on the like how we view them. But I do think that the percentage of success kind of contributes to how we view these players, especially like as a fan, because
Mhm.
Zverev, I mean, has had a great year. But when you think of the fact that he's played 22 tournaments, he has significantly more losses. He's only won 2 tournaments, the 2 Masters 1000s. And that kind of weighs into like how we view them, because Alcaraz has won like 4 out of 15 or something like that this year. So he goes into a tournament, people are like, okay, he's gonna maybe be a big threat to win this. Zverev significantly less percentage wise, right? So
Yeah.
you're looking at like 20. Look at it this way: Alcaraz has won like over 25% of the tournaments he's played in, whereas Zverev has won less than 10%.
But has more wins. Is that what you're saying?
Oh well, no, but like
Like,
he has a higher ranking though is kind of what I'm
oh,
saying.
okay. Got you. Got you. Got you. Yeah,
So
that is interesting.
yeah, and then with Sinner, like Sinner's only played in 14 tournaments this year. Like
Wow.
that's pretty nuts. But I'm gonna mention this actually in a little bit with my what's new. He's been playing very well in the tournaments that he has played in.
Oof. Well, all right. Well, why don't we get into segments then? Because I'm excited to hear about that.
Sounds good. Sounds good. So what's new in tennis? What'd you see this week?
Yeah, I saw something pretty scary actually. Fritz and his girlfriend almost got robbed when they were in London. They rented an Airbnb and they woke up in the middle of the night to uh, like basically someone trying to punch in the code to get into the house. And I guess like his girlfriend told him to go like lock the second lock, and it was just missing out of the door. So they think that they were targeted because like people know of the Airbnbs in the area and there might have been some collusion. But Taylor, being the heroic man that he is, had to grab a weapon to fight off the intruder. Can you guess what his weapon of choice was?
Well, I mean, I don't want to spoil it because I did see the story as well, but yeah, pretty an interesting choice.
I was gonna say, yeah. So he grabs his tennis racket, nonetheless, which pretty good choice if you're if you're Taylor Fritz, right? But
Yeah.
I'm glad they're safe. Kidding aside, I did kind of chuckle when I saw that he grabbed his tennis racket though to defend himself and his girlfriend. And of course, his girlfriend, whatever her name is, right? Just had to document the whole incident on Instagram.
Yeah, pretty insane. I mean, honestly, tennis racket not a bad choice, but like you'd think you'd go for something heavier, right?
Yeah, or maybe something lethal, like a knife.
Yeah, I mean,
Unless you're like not about that. Like,
yeah, unless
you
you're
think
not
Taylor's
about
just
that
not
that
ready to
life.
take
Yeah.
someone's life?
Yeah. I don't know. Definitely a
It's
scary
pretty
situation,
valley
but
boy.
glad they're both okay.
Yeah. What about you? What did you see this week?
I mean, like I said with Sinner, Sinner actually accomplished something this year, which was something that's only been done by the big three since 1990, which was he made the quarterfinals of every tournament he entered this year. So with the big three, it was Federer did it in 2005, Djokovic did it in 2011 and 2015, and then Nadal did it in 2018. So I mean, with Sinner, really impressive with that 65-6 record. And honestly, I think this may have been a reasonable pick in that best seasons draft we did earlier this year, where the only knock on it would have been maybe his 0-3 record versus Alcaraz on tour this year. But yeah, overall, just kind of wanted to make a comment on how impressive this Sinner season has been and show how kind of historic it's been.
Yeah, that's incredible. Now the real question is, can he repeat it next year? It's pretty unlikely, right? I feel like this is just record breaking, literally, and you can only go down from there. Am I wrong to think that?
Yeah, I mean, the tough part is this, like, even with the fact that like he's 0-3 versus Alcaraz and he does have a few losses here. I mean, everybody has a few losses,
Mm-hmm.
but no one seems to have figured out his game. Like, it's not like, oh, by the end of the year, people are starting to beat him more and more. People still have no idea how to beat this guy. Like,
Yeah.
his game seems pretty impregnable. And I don't know how people are going to adjust to that and what they're going to do to beat him next year unless he beats himself and has injuries or something that stop him.
Yeah, yeah. And so on that in that season, it doesn't even, I guess, mention the six King Slam since I was in EXO, but kind of like that's also a big ass deal too. I mean, beating the arguably like five best guys in the world and then beating Alcaraz in the final, like that's still a good accomplishment, even though it may not count towards his ATP accolades.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest probably part of that was just beating Alcaraz in the final there. But yeah, I think that also showed like just the fact that no one knows what to do against him.
Yeah, yeah, I know. All right, let's get into some betting.
Sounds good. Sounds good. So this week I went with Kovacevic plus 210 over Medvedev. Honestly, I love this bet. Like, I don't really understand why Medvedev is such a massive favorite. Like, plus 210 is pretty significant. Medvedev does have the head to head. He won earlier this year, but it was on clay, which is never great for the Americans, and it was a really close match. Kovacevic overall is the higher ranked guy, and honestly, Medvedev hasn't had the greatest year. He has one win over a top 100 player on hardcourt this year, and it was the last round against Nakashima. So we'll see if he can string two wins together here, but I think it's much more of a toss up than plus 210.
Yeah, no, definitely. This is in Belgrade, right? This match.
Yes.
So this threw me off because I thought Belgrade last year was a clay tournament, and I'm pretty sure it was, but I know they switched it to hardcourt this year.
Yeah.
Which, yeah, this is pretty nuts because I was looking at the lines and I'm like, Sonigo plus 300 against Rublev, like yes, yes, yes. But then I was looking more into it, and it's not on clay; it's on hardcourt. But I still am going with this as my bet of the week because I think it's great value and um Sonigo actually has the head-to-head advantage, which I was kind of surprised about. It's 2-1, but his two wins came on clay, and obviously this is not a clay tournament. But I think I'm willing to take the risk here at plus 300 in Sonigo, who's still a solid player, and Rublev has been struggling. So I like this bet.
Yeah, it's definitely tough. I mean, Rublev is such a hit or miss guy, it seems like sometimes.
I was
So,
gonna say, yeah, since he's so hit or miss and he missed last week, I feel like
yeah.
he might hit this week. Like he kind of alternates when he does well.
Yeah. You're like, I missed it last week. I got to go this week. But then you're like, oh, he might actually just come out and win the tournament this week.
Exactly. That's exactly. But
Yeah. It's
plus
tough. It's
300.
tough with Rublev with how inconsistent he is sometimes.
Exactly. How about match of the week? What'd you go with?
I went with Dimitrov beating Echeverry in 3 sets.
Oh, not
Was an
Dimitrov
interesting match.
losing.
Yeah. Didn't go for him getting beaten by Hachinov, but it was a close match. Obviously, the first set was really close. Neither guy could get a break. Had a really intense tiebreaker where Echeverry had 3 set points and Dimitrov fought back, ended up getting one himself, but wasn't able to convert it, and Echeverry ended up taking it. But then that second set, Dimitrov actually just upped his game, ended up taking it 6-3 with 2 breaks, broke earlier in the set and then broke to win the set. And then in that last set, like I was talking about earlier, just showed how critical those certain points are. Dimitrov kind of clutched up right at the right time and at 6-5 broke him and won the match 7-5. So very cool match, very close. And I felt like it was just some high level tennis.
Yeah, totally. I feel like Dimitrov should have beat Echeverry a little better than that, but still all around great match.
100%. I mean, important for him to get a few wins in this tournament if he hopes to make a turn, especially with Djokovic maybe pulling out. Apparently, Djokovic actually returned to Serbia, so a lot of people
Ooh.
don't think that he's going to be coming out to turn this year.
I was gonna say if I was a betting man, I'd probably bet that if I was a betting man, but I would probably bet that Djokovic is not playing.
Yeah, it
You know, I think
doesn't look
it's
that way
probably
right now.
70% chance that he doesn't.
Yeah, how about you? What'd you go for?
I went with the Popper and Medvedev match, the 3 set tiebreaker thriller. Both are bigger guys, but they showed how nimble they move and just how versatile their games could be. We saw a lot of cat and mouse up at the net, but then also combined with like heavy baseline hitting. So it was just a fun match all around. Popper took the first set 6-4, and then Medvedev actually double faulted to lose that first set on a break point, kind of like Stefanos did against Zverev. But Medi bounced back and took the second set 6-2, force a decider. And this is where we saw the famous Medvedev racket throw that I'm sure everyone has seen on social media by now. But he launched that thing like 20 feet up in the air. It was pretty incredible
Yeah.
actually, but he tried to catch it and he didn't, and it almost hit him, so that would have been bad.
Yeah, it was pretty funny. He threw it and then he was like, "Oh, that one went a lot higher than I thought it was going to."
Yeah. I always like when I do that, I'll throw it up and then I'm like, fuck, I gotta catch it because I
Yeah,
just don't get unlimited free rackets.
yeah.
um
I go for the
yeah.
throw against the fence because the fence always catches it, and usually it's not super hard, so it's like kind of safe of safe.
Oh, yeah, okay. And then also in the third set, this is what I had already mentioned earlier about that just terrible call. But Poprin after that had the sickest touch volley and let out the biggest roar after that, like straight towards Medvedev too. Like this play was sick. He comes up to the net and lets out a solid like 8 to 10 second scream. And then that just got me so juiced. I was thinking, all right, he's winning the match after this. To be able to come back from that call, like save the break point, and then just assert your dominance on your opponent with that scream. He obviously ended up winning the match in 3 sets. In the third set, tiebreaker 7-4, closed it out. I was in awe watching this.
Yeah, I mean, I think my one point about this match that is interesting is like Medvedev seems to be able to not let like second set or first set loss kind of get in his head. I mean, we saw it at the U.S. Open against Sinner. Think about
Mm-hmm.
that. Like he lost that first set and then came out and like kind of dominated the second set. And I think that's kind of an impressive thing with Medvedev, but also it's tough to watch because it sometimes feels like he's so okay with losing that it's like, oh, does he even care? Because he'll like double fault on a break point, and sometimes you're like, it looked like he just didn't care about whether that serve went in or not. But then he'll come out in the next set, and because he is able to just kind of forget about the past, comes out in the second set and just dominates.
Yeah, it must be nice. I feel like, yeah, like you said, he's just on that break point. The double fault was almost just all right, let's get the set over with, and then I'll come out and win the second set.
Yeah, always
Like
weird.
he's that confident.
100%.
All right, and that's the show. If you're not already subscribed, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. You can find us on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube at Painting Lines Podcast. Feel free to shoot us a DM or email us any questions or thoughts at paintinglinespodcast@gmail.com.